digestive. That's the kind of a show they should watch. So we are now live on YouTube as well. So I'm gonna kick things off. So welcome to day 3 of Transparency by Design. My name is Elena Pugia, and I am the moderator for the summit. There's other moderators as well in the lighthouses, but I'm the one moderating the main sessions. I am the CEO and founder of Data Natives, which is a community of data scientists, more than 80,000 to be exact, and a media publication. Again, catered to data scientists, machine learning experts, and artificial intelligence enthusiasts, as well as anyone in any business who might be interested in these topics. And of course, I'm here to represent Both End, which is a non-profit organization that started a couple of months ago as a reaction to Corona crisis, in order to create a community of domain experts, innovators, and tech affiliados who are interested in persevering in our healthcare infrastructure privacy. As a first starting point, that's the first project that Both End is taking on. So we had 2 exciting days, and now we're on to the third one. We are kicking off with a keynote presentation, or fireside, let's say, of the 2 gentlemen here that I will introduce at the end. And afterwards, we're gathering in the lighthouses. We have 4 lighthouses where different experts are meeting to discuss topics around healthcare, privacy, tech, and civil society. We will have 2 other discussions, a debate at 11:50 a.m. By the way, all the times shown here in this slide, they are Berlin time, so it's GMT +2. So we're going to have a debate on protocol certification and a panel afterwards on how can citizens feel free. I guess that's a very big existential question, more like, with a lot of connotations. And afterwards, we will gather at 5 to discuss the final results of the lighthouses. We're aiming to have a result out of this 3-day summit, and every lighthouse will present a presentation. The results should be actionable, not only conclusions, let's say. It should be, this is what came out of this, and those are the next steps that we're taking to address it. And then we will meet at 5:40 to present those results to everybody, and to finish off the day and the summit with a keynote presentation by Catherine Townsend, who is the COO at data.org, also dealing with similar topics and trying to use data for social good. One reminder for everybody of this summit to meet with each other and to continue discussing at the Both End community platform, which is something in between an online co-working space and a space for thought and reflection. So we really want people to meet there and to continue working on projects and finding solutions for the COVID-19. How do you sign up? You go to a summit group and you then accept the invite. You must receive it by email. Please check your spam in case it goes to your spam, because it's an address you don't have saved. And there, when you sign up, you can, in our summit group, you can chat with other participants in a Rocket chat. You can access reading material, such as the manifestos that we have collected, so that we can reconcile them here. You can access the transcription from all sessions, and you can co-work for future endeavors. The idea section. So this is where you can start a new project, a new idea, where you can collaborate with other people, and to use a similar, let's say, to use familiar reference, it is like Google Docs. So you can go there and you can write together with someone else, and you can have your own sections and comment with each other. You can write down an idea, you can write it with a short description, and people will be able to give feedback and develop it together. So really, it's a project. It's a place where you can create a project. As I mentioned, we really are aspiring to bring results and actionable results. So we want what we are doing to have a meaning, which it's practical, not just theoretical. And those practicals that we have set for this summit are to consolidate all existing manifestos for COVID-19. At the beginning of the journey, we thought of having a manifesto, but at this point, I think we realized that there's already a lot of content out there. So we decided that it would be much better for us to instead focus on consolidating all the manifestos. Draft a software certification standard with GDPR, which is at least GDPR compliant. That means checking out what is available out there, what sort of apps are there. Germany has released the COVID-19 app a couple of days ago. Is it GDPR compliant, for example? That could be a good question for one of the lighthouses to evaluate basically and see if it is GDPR compliant, and also on top of that, to see actually if it does address to all of the different groups, and if it's usable for everybody. Because we believe that technology could be the answer. However, we need to take into consideration what is the question, and the question most of the time is not the same for every community and for every group. So taking into consideration all of the marginalized communities. Just briefly, very, very briefly, that's just to freshen up your memory from what has happened so far at the lighthouses. So in healthcare, one of the key takeaways so far has been that it's very important mental health is very important, and I would address that specifically also with marginalized communities. So to have a hygiene and to have a destigmatization. To create so universal healthcare is not really universal, and that's something to be considered of. And of course, that in order to do a bottom-up approach, you need to raise awareness and create educational opportunities. For privacy policy, what is very, very important is trust and inclusivity, which builds up very nicely from healthcare, and data literacy. At a data summit, I guess that's really, really important. One of the quotes that was used was provided by one of the participants, and was also recited by the moderator, is that we have to reach the people where they are. We cannot imagine them that they are only, reading 58 pages reports. Actually, you have to reach them maybe on TikTok or wherever they are right now. In tech, the key takeaways is that basically technology cannot solve problems unless they have the correct information. And in order to include all voices in the discovery process, you need to do that. There's corporate resistance on basic market research, and there's a big gap between the public and private sector. And I think that comes again and again from also the privacy policy, that 58-page reports are not the solution to actually reach the masses. And technical solutions can only become more broadly adopted if government takes the lead to educate citizens. Again, education is very important. And I see for civil society this is missing, but for civil society that I'm actually moderating as well, so I can tell you that from us, actually, that's very much in line with what we're thinking. And one very important thing that came up as well is for grassroots movements, it's very important to provide a structure, and to provide a structure that will help them further their mission to, if anything, mimic mainstream structures, in order to provide the infrastructure for them to blossom. Of course, that has a hesitation and resistance in its own, because that might mean that the project might be diluted or change direction. However, in order to be successful, it is also necessary. And for us, the main action item that we will be working on today to present at the end of the day in the final results is a document that we started on the Both and community platform, where we will be taking learnings from a organizational structure, if you may, from a startup or from a corporate. So actually looking at the business infrastructures and try to replicate that in a nonprofit, for the nonprofit or for the grassroots movement, to actually help provide some stability and some efficiency in the processes. So that's the aim for our key results presentation today. So stay tuned and you'll see it. Now, as I mentioned, one of the important points in the conversations and one of the key takeaways of all lighthouses has been how can we be inclusive and provide data sets that would reflect to all participants, to all different voices. So there's going to be a conversation now about this by Stewart Rogers, who's the managing editor at Gritdaily, who's also the co-founder of the BadassEmpire, and he's a regular public speaker and MC, together with Maxim Khalilov, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, please correct it afterwards, who is the head of R&D at Glovo. So a lot of experience with AI and ML, and at Glovo. So I'm sure he has seen a lot of data sets of geolocations. So gentlemen, I now pass the torch to you, and that's for now from me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Elena. And good morning, everybody. I wish I could say it's great to see everyone, but we don't get that on the wonderful Zoom calls these days. It's the big difference between online and offline conferences. But thanks so much for joining us. Max, good morning to you. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Yeah, it's an amazing morning actually here. I'm in Lisbon right now. I supposed to move to Barcelona, where Glovo is located in 3 weeks. I supposed to do it like much earlier in April, but for the obvious reasons it didn't happen. And yeah, all good. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for being here. And I know it may seem completely ironic, but we're going to talk about bias in AI, and there's two white middle-aged men on the screen, but I think we can all get past that because we're talking about data bias as opposed to anything else. But it's been a very interesting topic. I speak about artificial intelligence. I interview a lot of people about artificial intelligence, and just to set the scene, obviously, we're seeing the world in a very different way now than we used to, thanks to the huge leaps that we've had in computer vision and the use of artificial intelligence and algorithms and machine learning in order to understand the world around us. Gone from, this happening on huge supercomputers to Google Lens on your phone, which can identify almost anything that you pointed at. Even if you don't take a photo, it does it in real time. And yet, when we think about things like facial recognition, about object detection and understanding, what we also have had to deal with, and we are still dealing with, is the huge amount of bias in the data. The most famous example of this being that before Google fixed it, because there was an uproar, if you searched for white people on Google and looked at images, you saw stock images, those crazy stock images with lots of white people standing around a computer laughing as if that's what meetings really look like in businesses. And then if you typed in black people and did the same search, you got mugshots of criminals. And this was a stark warning to everybody that the data that we have available to us, and hasten to use the word big data because I think people sometimes misconstrue big data. Big data means all the data, not just a large data set. So literally Google has been using everything that it's got in its armory. That data is flawed because it's biased. So why not, before we get into the conversation part, just explain to people from your side a little bit of your history in AI and what, in particular has been interesting you when it comes to data and data bias.
Yes, absolutely. And well, if we talk about specifically about artificial intelligence and machine learning systems, they can be only as good as the data that we put into them, right? So the machines are like in this way, they are not smart. They cannot really like distinguish bad data from good data. They just use everything you give to it, right? So, and if bad data contains implicit like racial, gender, or ideological biases, then yeah, you will have it in the output as well, right? So, these days we see that many AI systems, they continue to be trained using like bad data, so biased data, right? Making this an ongoing problem. I think that actually the problem is, as you said, so wider than just data for AI, right? If we look at our world, it's also biased. I mean, there are a bunch of examples, right? One of them that I recently learned about is we all were taught, like at school or maybe later, that a typical symptom of heart attack is a chest pain, right? I think everyone knows. So, but the reality is that this is a typical symptom for men. For women, it's number 7 or number 8 on the list only. And since our world is kind of designed for, at least in the Western world, like for white men, right? Then everyone believes that this is a kind of typical symptom for everyone. And when I learned about it, I was like really shocked. Like, okay, so if we as humans believe in such a wrong thing, then how can we teach machines to be unbiased, right? And going like deeper to the AI world, there's another like very famous example. It's not primarily about bias, it's more like about the robustness of AI systems. Some time ago, there was a task, like a computer vision task, right? Image recognition task to distinguish husky from wolves, right? I mean, they look pretty much similar, right?
Right.
And there was like a big data set which was fed to the system, convolutional neural networks, state-of-the-art systems back then. And finally, everything was good. So the system was able to distinguish huskies from wolves in a very good, with a very, very high quality, with one exception. So if there was snow on the picture, it was always like labeling the animal as a wolf, simply because there were not so many photos of huskies taken on the snow, right? The majority was wolf, like wild nature and stuff. And yeah, it's not racial or gender bias, but it's so easy to fool the system, if you have like bad data.
Absolutely, and we've seen examples of data bias in not just image systems, but in and this is, of course, is very serious in hiring systems as well. So when it comes to using artificial intelligence to hire the right people for your open role, we've seen examples of massive biases within the hiring systems too, because it's systemic in the way that we do things. There's unconscious bias in everything that we input in the first place, and as you rightly said, if you put the wrong information in, you are going to get the wrong result out. I mean, you simply cannot make AI is not some kind of magic tool that's going to figure out the right, fair, and balanced way to deal with the information. The information has to be right, fair, and balanced in the first place. Correct?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the interesting question is, what can we do to fix it, right?
Right.
Or mitigate it at least. And I think there are several options which we can discuss. The obvious one is, let's try to unbias our data set, right? Let's try to neutralize it somehow, balance it, and train a new system which would be more gender or race neutral. So this is one option. Another option, which I think can be like a fair solution in many applications, is to explain why this bias happened, right? And this is actually a very interesting topic, specifically not even an application to the bias detection. It's like a big topic for machine learning these days in general, because modern systems based on deep learning principles or neural networks, they are not really good in explainability, right? So usually you cannot, it's a black box, right? So you cannot explain why a certain decision was happened and was taken. So, and but still, I mean, I think that actually this is in some applications, it can be a very interesting way to mitigate the problem. And of course, what you can also do is you can try to fix the output. Right, so Google Translate, actually, I think they took a very interesting approach. So some time ago, when they made the bias detection a priority for them, they started to give different options, different translation options in the interface. If you translate from a language where there is no distinction between genders in particular settings, like English, for instance, sometimes it's gender neutral, and you translate it into Spanish, then these days, Spanish or Portuguese, and these days you can see like actually there are two options for men, for a woman, right? So like masculine and feminine translation. So yeah, this is one more way to fix it. What do you think? What do you think our society would accept better? Which of these options?
That's a very good question. I mean, I was reading about everything that happened with Imagenet, and obviously Imagenet was gamed very easily in order to include racial slurs attached to the images of people when they were doing that challenge to create artificial intelligence to identify people, and it was very easily gamed in the same way that Microsoft's Tay was very easily gamed within a few hours on Twitter, and so on and so forth. And Andre Barbu did some research on what was happening at Imagenet. And what was interesting was that there was an effort to create algorithms that would remove the bias from the data, but as Andre made note of, stripping out the bias could make a data set less useful, because once you strip out all of the bias, it quickly slices up your data into such small pieces that there's hardly anything left to use for the algorithms. That's not a reason why we shouldn't strive towards it. File back and automatically figure out data biases within data to help with that situation. But I think Olga Ryzikowski once said that debiasing humans is going to be much harder than debiasing AI. And that's surely where the source of the problem is, right? How do we like, beyond using tools like IBM's tool, how are we actually going to get to a situation, do you think, where we have unbiased data, but in enough volume to make it useful for machine learning and AI algorithms?
Yeah. I think there are two things that I can think of, right? So first one is it all comes to the way how we collect data. So how we decide which data we want to feed our system with, right? And I think it would take quite a lot of time, since the modern AI systems are very hungry, very hungry for data, right? And if you want to make it like to feed it with, for example, like unbiased gender data, you probably would need to collect quite a lot of new data, which you don't have right now, right? And it would take time and effort. This is one, right? And another one, which is maybe more applicable to a short-term solution. So there is such a technology which is called transfer learning. So modern deep learning systems, they have a capability to transfer knowledge from like a big, let's say, out of domain generic data sets to a more specialized task, right? It's called like transfer learning or domain adaptation. So basically when you try to adapt your system to domain. So I think for many applications, especially maybe in the image recognition and the natural language processing areas, it can be a nice solution to look at, right? At least in the short term. So when you basically have your biased data set in the beginning, you train your system, but you are not using it directly. Then you try to bias it to a specific application. And then in the end, what you will have is basically several variations of your model, which do a great job for a particular use case. For example, if we generate text, this is a text, this system would simulate a text written by a woman or for women, right? And then you have another variation which does the same job but for men. And I think in the short term, a specialization might be a kind of potential solution, but in the long run, definitely we just need to unbias our data set.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing in terms of using AI with hiring systems, like we were talking about before, whereby it's possible, especially in the tech environment, where almost every job that there is in a startup can be tested for. So if you're hiring a graphic designer, you can ask them to send in some graphic designs, or test them for that. If you're hiring somebody for coding the back end, you can set them a test to see if they can code. And then when you're looking at resumes and CVs, you can have systems that take out the names, take out the images, take out the ages, take out anything that is personally identifiable, and correct the text so that the text doesn't have any gender bias or age bias in it, so that what you're just seeing is their sets in their experience and the roles that they've had. You don't know whether you are potentially going to hire John or Wendy or Jose or Wilhelmina, and you shouldn't, because of course unconscious bias means that many hirers will, if they're white and they're in a hiring position, especially if they're male and white, they would pick either John or Wendy. They will look at the foreign names and unconsciously not choose those people. AI can help us to actually remove information and correct information so that human beings can make less biased decisions. Is there any movement in terms of the computers themselves being able to fix this bias issue for the AI? Is there any way that we can actually create algorithms? I mean, I know IBM has tried really hard, but when we don't seem to be making a lot of headway in that, the answer seems to be to unbias ourselves, which, as we said, Rosakowski doesn't believe that's very easy.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's goes like beyond a simple, simple biases like gender or race or something like that. While you were talking, I was thinking about the hiring process. So exactly, when a recruiter gets like a bunch of CVs, they're supposed to be like totally neutral for race, for gender, and for age as well, right? But what happens in reality, I believe that even if the age is not in CV, it's almost never there these days. What you do as a recruiter probably is just look at the years when the person graduated from the university, right? And majority of cases, it can be a very good indication of the age. I think this is a kind of a very good example of a second level of bias that we as humans have, right?
Right.
Yeah. And talking about AI systems, yes, IBM is probably one of the most prominent companies talking about this problem, trying to come up with some solutions. I know that Google in application to NLP also does quite a lot. And I'm pretty sure other companies, at least big companies, they're doing the same. So I think that we're moving to the right direction generally. The speed is not like very, amazing. So I believe that it would take quite a while before we'll get to the point when we'll have like unbiased systems. And I'll let you ask your next question first, because I have another thing.
We do have an interesting audience question I'd like to weave in. It seems like quite the right time to do it. Thank you, Stephen, for sending us your question. So Max, could we make up sets of synthetic data to use for training of machine learning systems that would lead to better outcomes? And this is the interesting part of the question, should we?
Okay. Yes, for both questions. I'm pretty sure that this is something that should be a priority for many applications. There are like other technologies rather than just creating like a synthetic training data, right? there is a field of AI which is called active learning. So in this case, your system, like a second layer system, decides which data you need to feed to your main machine learning predictive mechanism, for example, to make it more robust and perform better. But you can also like relatively easily tune this active learning module to focus, to optimize the bias, right? So basically to make your system unbiased. So instead of just investing like a lot of time into creating like a big data set, which you will feed later, you can be smart about it and optimize your effort. And I think it's very important, especially in the light of the new cognitive systems, cognitive services, which are coming to this world. I don't know if you heard about the GPT-2 model, for example. So this is a generative natural language generation model, which can write text primarily of any length. Given the prefix, so you give it a prompt, you give it like some examples, and then it starts writing itself. And of course, it's trained on a huge amount of data, like I don't know, like maybe X% of the English data which exists on the internet, right? So, and we tried it like 2 days ago. I was playing with it for different tasks, and in some cases, it's like extremely biased. It gives you like suggestions which you never want to publish.
Right.
Yeah. So, and here it's a very good example of a black box system to a certain extent, because you have no idea what's going on inside. And you as a user, if you really want to avoid that, you need to build like on top of this GPT-2 model to make sure that your output wouldn't harm you, right? Because if it happens, no one would, people will come to you, not to the GPT-2 model creators, right? So yeah, and I think for this particular applications and a lot of similar ones, you need to have like very good data to fix the output of your system. And here specialization will start playing a very important role, because if you want to fix this problem generally, it will be probably a task not for smaller players, but primarily for Google, Microsoft, and all these big guys. Yeah.
Yeah, although, you know, it has to be said, if we come back to image recognition, you know, we talk about Google and Microsoft. Microsoft have pulled some pretty ridiculous tricks over the last couple of years to gather as much facial data as possible. For example, the thing they launched where it guesses your age. And I think you and I, Max, both know or suspect that a lot of those ages they gave were wildly incorrect on purpose, so that you would share the ridiculous result, which made it go viral, so they could capture more facial data. But of course, that propagated itself all over Facebook, and Facebook has a very biased demographic. You know, despite the fact that it reaches many people on the planet, it is quite biased. It does not include most of the world that comes from anywhere other than a developed country. So we're missing out on huge amounts of ethnic data and huge amounts of variety of human beings within that data set. They then went one further, and it's quite famously known that the vegetable paste called Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. So they set up these booths all over tech shows, tech conferences, where you had to taste the Marmite, and then it was going to detect whether you liked it or hated it from a picture of your face. Again, they were this is a ruse to collect as much facial data as possible, but they did it at tech conferences, which are largely white and male. You know, when are we going to learn to actually, you know, stop doing silly tricks to get our data? And how do you think it'll be easier to, well, it's not going to be easier to, but how do you think we can get into those places where we do not traditionally collect data? You know, including when you look at what many people have been doing with genomic data. We don't collect genomic data from people in, you know, disadvantaged areas and from different ethnicities and all that kind of stuff as well. So we're missing out on a lot of potential solutions to, you know, medical problems because we're not connecting genomic data from a wide enough sample as well. Is it just a case we need to stop focusing on people like you and me and actually get out and start grabbing data from elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, I think that's a first step would be to realize that the problem exists. Right? And when I say to realize, you have to do it in a quantifiable way. And here, I think the good strategy, first level strategy, would be to be smart about how you create your test data. Right? So, all the ML systems, like initially, they are tested on a certain data set, right? And the way how you create these data sets, to a certain degree, dictates the way how you're gonna develop your ML systems further, right?
Yeah.
And if your test data is biased as well as your training data, you will never realize that it's biased, right? So I think we need to start be smart about how we test our systems first. Yeah.
And Jennifer actually asks a question that's very related to what we were just talking about in terms of, you know, is the only way to correct the bias to be able to flood the system with counter data? But I like how Jennifer opens her question, which is it too late to avoid significant tech bias? I mean, that's a big question. Is it too late, Max, or do we have time to fix this?
Good question. Well, to be honest, I would be happy to say it's not, but I think for some applications it can be too late. I mean, too late in a sense that it would cost a lot of time, energy, and money to fix it, right? To do it properly. Which doesn't necessarily mean that actually we shouldn't do it, right? Probably we should, but it would be like a much more serious decision, right? And as I said, so probably the first step is not like just machine learning or just data, right? It's the world around us. I mean, if you look at the IT departments of pretty much any company in the world, right? And try to see like how many men and women work there, you will see that the bias is there. I don't know, like there are many more men than women, right? It's always like that. And we had a discussion the other day, like why it's happening, right? So is it like really that men are more generally talented in IT? I don't think so. It all comes from the education, the way how our society perceives jobs, right, for men and for women. And I think that's actually where we can start from, right? And on the afterwards, we can start thinking about fixing our AI systems, which would be easier actually if unbiased the world, the data will be unbiased as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Max, we are close to time. So I just want to ask you, one more quick question and get a quick answer so we can be respectful of everyone's time and finish at 9:30 on the dot. But, in terms of the best examples of, people that have done this right and they're actually solving this problem, is there anybody out there that you think everyone should go and look up and that have been doing very well at solving the data bias problem right now?
Yeah, well, I think those two examples that I brought in the beginning. So I think IBM is doing a great job in talking about it, creating awareness, investing into unbiasing. So if you want to read about it, I think there are a lot of resources. And second, which is more like, which is closer to my background, that's where I can be biased. It's Google Translate as well, right? So take a look at how it translates from English into more morphologically rich languages like Roman languages, right? And see what it does. And you would be surprised that actually they do take care of this problem. So,
yes, yeah. Again, actually, I think not a lot of people compliment Google on what they do, but I think if you look at the amount of projects in AI and the amount of papers in AI, I think currently China and the United States are fairly much, equivalent with each other. And the vast reason for that in the United States is because of Google. And although they have had some horrific data bias incidents, we have to take our hat off to the fact that they spend time fixing them and they fix them as quickly as they possibly can. So, hats off to Google in that respect. Max, this has been a fascinating conversation. I wish we could go on forever, but unfortunately we can't. Really appreciate you being here this morning. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Have a good
day.
Thank you.
Спасибо вам.
Well, thank you from my side as well. I think we lost though Max in the meantime. Anyway, I shall shield everybody to at the lighthouses. We're starting in 10 minutes. So everybody move to your lighthouse. In order to access it, just a reminder, you need to go to the agenda on the Bizabo link, go to the session and be patient. It only opens 2 minutes before the session. So be patient and click on it and it will redirect you either at a Zoom link or at the Bizabo interactive tool.